How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jason. I'll be your host today on this CFL talk show, Hussey's Huddle. In this video, I put myself in the GM chair for all 9 CFL teams and select one free agent that I feel is undervalued and that I would heavily prioritize re-signing this offseason. But really quickly before we get started, if you are new, consider liking the video or subscribing to Hussey's Huddle for more CFL content like this. It helps me get it out to more people on YouTube, and I would sincerely appreciate it. With those things said, let's get started with the list. Starting from the east and moving west, we start with the Montreal Alouettes. And Montreal has been busy this offseason, but one guy I think who should be brought back is wide receiver Jake Winnipeg. Winnipeg is a guy that really meshed well with Vernon Adams, especially in the red zone in his first year in the CFL, catching 8 touchdowns. And he's also this kind of guy that, even though he's not the most explosive player, he doesn't create the most explosive plays all the time, he knows how to get open in the short areas of the field and especially can come down with those tough catches like we've seen in the red zone. Moving on to the Ottawa Red Blacks, my selection for this team is offensive tackle Mark Cordy. Cordy was a 2018 first-round pick, and over his first couple CFL seasons, he has developed into a decent prospect at tackle. This is something that we don't see a lot of Canadian players playing currently in the CFL, and for those that don't know much about offensive line play, tackles are usually much more important, especially to the pass blocking schemes of CFL teams, than players that are playing on the interior. So a guy that has the skill set and the quickness and everything along with it to go play tackle like Cordy is a guy that you should prioritize re-signing this offseason, especially when you consider the fact that Cordy is still such a young player, and with more starts under his belt, he's sure to get even better. Up next is my selection for the Toronto Argonauts, and for this one I went with linebacker Chris Ackie. Ackie spent the last couple years in Montreal, where he's developed into a very sturdy linebacker who also carries a Canadian passport. Akkie's a guy that possesses some good coverage instincts, particularly in zone, which is something that you really do need to have in the Canadian game these days with how offenses attack the middle of the field. A guy who is still relatively young, has the ability to contribute in a present sense, while also acting as a mentor for this very young Toronto team that's looking to come back here in 2021 on paper. Akkie's just going to do a lot for this team in terms of stabilizing and teaching the Canadian game, especially to American players that are coming into the league. I think it's going to be a big boost for Toronto if they are able to bring him back for 2021. Moving on to the Hamilton Tire Cats. The Tire Cats, over the last couple weeks, have made a barrage of signings, but most of these re-signings have come on the perimeter. They've basically locked up their entire receiving corps, but they have so much work to do along the offensive line, which was actually one of their best units in the 2019 season, where they finished first in the CFL standings. Looking at their pending free agents, it's a pretty hefty list along the offensive line, with Offensive Lineman of the Year, Chris Van Zyl, scheduled to hit the market. You got Brandon Revenberg, who's considered the best young guard in the CFL, set to hit the market. But the guy I've chosen for Hamilton's selection on this list is the guy that mans the other guard position for Hamilton, Darius Sirocco. And the main reason I choose this is because of affordability. I just think Sirocco is going to command a significantly lower salary than Revenberg and Van Zyl will. So I think to start in the re-signing period, Sirocco will be a much more easier negotiation in that sense. And bringing him back, you cannot afford to lose both and all 3 of these players if you're the Hamilton Tire Cats for next season. It would just be a massive blow to this team, and even though they bring back all these skill players, a lot about football is tackling and blocking. And if you can't do that, you're not going to win very many games. And Hamilton has a really good blocking unit if they can bring back everybody. Now we move towards the west with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And Winnipeg has a lot of interesting ones that you could go with. And there was actually a couple of defensive linemen that I considered taking with this selection, but ultimately I decided to pick defensive lineman Steven Richardson, who actually was a very underrated member of that team's Grey Cup victory in 2019. So this Winnipeg roster, they lost defensive tackle Drake Nevis, who was really their ultimate run-stuffing defensive tackle. They lost him to Toronto in 2020 free agency, and Richardson, along with Canadian Jake Thomas, were scheduled to start at defensive tackle if there was a 2020 season, which of course there wasn't. And Richardson, I think, though he's not the plugger up front against the run that Nevis is, I think Richardson does provide a little bit more upside as a pass rusher. And though he hasn't proven as much at the CFL level as a guy like Jake Thomas or some of these other pending free agents for Winnipeg, Richardson is only 24 years old, is a worthwhile investment to keep around stars like Adam Bighill and defensive end Willie Jefferson as Winnipeg attempts to replicate a great defense from 2019. Moving on to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and my selection here is cornerback Lj Mccray. Now, Saskatchewan had a huge list of free agents at the beginning of the re-signing period. It's shortened now. They've brought back a lot of their key pieces, especially on offense, but a couple guys on defense like Mike Edom, and reportedly they're close to an extension with Charleston Hughes as well. But my selection here is Mccray for the same reasoning that I've used for other teams in this video, and that's just that CFL teams are looking to save money this offseason, and they may not be able to afford their most premium players, at least during this re-signing period. So bringing back a guy like Mccray, who was a starter on Saskatchewan's defense last season, but is not considered to be on the same level as a guy like Ed Gainey, who has a considerable CFL resume, will be cheaper to bring back for Saskatchewan. Mccray seemed like he was settling very nicely into his role at corner for Saskatchewan, bringing home 3 interceptions during the 2019 season. And even though he was kind of the guy that was being picked on at times for the Rough Riders, given all the other talented players they have in their coverage unit, Mccray still held his own and battled through a lot of struggles. And I think going into a second full season as a starter, he has loads of potential. If the Riders bring back Mccray, they shore up a secondary that was key to the team's success last season. They would have him, Luchez Purifoy, Mike Edom, and Nick Marshall all under contract for next season. And that would be 4 of their 5 defensive back starters. And if you can bring back Gainey as well, which I'm not too sure of their cap space situation, I just think relatively, and I'm very confident in saying this, that Mccray is going to make less than Gainey in 2021 just because of their resumes. I would prioritize Mccray over Gainey for that reason. Now moving on to the Calgary Stampeders, my selection is a guy that does have a decently high profile, and that's linebacker / defensive back Jamar Wall. Wall has actually been with Calgary since 2012, so he's one of the longest tenured players with any CFL team in the league. But that doesn't mean they should let him go come this offseason. Wall has proven himself not just as a coverage player, but as a leader on this defense, as a mainstay. And when you actually look around this Calgary defense, it's not this scary defense that we've been accustomed to in years past, with guys like Trey Roberson not currently in the CFL. You got guys like Deshaun Amos, who also left. So that secondary is looking very shaky. But where Wall will most likely figure in is, again, at his cover linebacker spot, which is always an important area of the field for the CFL defenses to have locked down because of the versatility that you need to play that role in the league. And having a veteran like Wall in that role, surrounded by, especially when Calgary has all this inexperience potentially, especially at linebacker. Who knows what they're going to do with Wynton McManus, former star that opted out and is now a pending free agent this offseason. So we'll see what they do with him. But regardless, bringing Wall back, to me, would be a priority if I was the GM of the Calgary Stampeders. For Edmonton, I'll keep this one relatively short. There's not too much to say, but I'm going with offensive tackle Colin Kelly. Kelly is one of the most underrated offensive tackles in the entire CFL, or even offensive lineman in general. He's a guy who's just a really sturdy pass blocker, moves his feet really well, has good technique, rarely gets beat badly in situations, and was just a huge part of this Edmonton offensive line that was really a powerhouse in terms of protecting the quarterback in 2019. And when you have that great of an offensive line, you do not want to let that go, because it ensures so much more consistency for your offense to operate. And Trevor Harris, you don't want to mess with a guy that's relatively not that mobile. You want to make sure Trevor Harris, a guy who's a pocket passer, has time to make these throws and reads. And bringing back Kelly would do a lot to ensure that that remains the case for Edmonton. And finally, we complete our list with the BC Lions. And my selection here is wide receiver Shaq Johnson. Shaq Johnson is probably one of my favorite players in the CFL. I just really like the way he has gone about himself the last couple of years. This guy has a lot of talent. For a national receiver, if you're looking for a guy that could break out in a different situation, like a lot of people were projecting Juwan Breskison to do with Toronto in 2020. Of course, that didn't happen. He's now a pending free agent as well. Go figure. But Shaq Johnson, he has over 500 yards in each of his last 2 seasons on limited targets. He's a guy that's he's honestly like the 4th receiver in this BC attack over the last couple seasons. And if you look at his yards per catch, he makes explosive plays when he gets the opportunities. And I would just love to see Shaq Johnson get more opportunities. And I think from a BC Lions perspective, having this guy as a 4th target and the addition of him being another Canadian receiver alongside Lamar Durant in the lineup, I think that's just huge for this team and gives them a lot more ratio flexibility as they go down their lineup. What Canadians they can start at other positions, they can afford to start Americans at other positions, say on defense or on the offensive line where they're having troubles. And Johnson's just a guy that if I was in the GM chair for the BC Lions, I would want on my football team. So that's going to do it for today's video. I'd like to thank you guys all for watching. Be sure to let me know in the comment section below what player on your favorite CFL team you'd like to see re-sign for the 2021 season. With that said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.